Casey, for joining me today. I'm really happy to have you here, and I'm happy to be a rare disease parent with you. And I always enjoy our time together, even though we're polar opposites. Somehow, like the two of us just work really well together.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Can you tell me more about Rose's disorder?
Sure. So Rose is diagnosed with a rare genetic disease, and it's a mutation in the HNRNPH2 gene.
Hmm.
We call it H2 for short.
Okay.
It took me 6 months to just remember that one group of letters.
Uh-huh.
It is de novo missense variant. It's an X-linked disease. All of these, but basically, what all this means is that the boys have it really rough, the girls not as rough.
Hmm.
It's not an inherited disease, so this just happens at some point, in the womb, and uh, the way that it expresses itself over the course of a child's life is if you're a boy, we believe that many of those boys probably get miscarried, and the ones that are born, um, have severe seizures, immobile, many catatonic. And for the girls, it's everywhere from severe seizures and catatonic state to some can walk and have some words,
Hmm.
but they use the word developmental delay, which I've always hated because
Hmm.
delay implies that somehow the development is going to
They're going to
occur
catch
one
up at some
day.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is not the case. And in fact, um, so many of these kiddos are sort of uh, development of maybe a 2-year-old or a 1-year-old, and some of them in adult bodies.
Yeah.
And in Rose's case, she can walk, but she struggles with um, transitioning from stairs or from different types of materials that her feet are on. They look differently.
Yeah.
And then she used to have 3 words: mom, dad, and outside, and she lost her ability to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's other there's many different sort of phenotypes around this disease and a very wide range, but ultimately all these kiddos need round the clock care from their parents or providers. They can't attend a normal school. And uh, your house has to be sort of you have to have a house that's built and organized in a way for them so that they don't poison themselves or get into any sort of dangerous situation, because it's like having a forever infant that can walk.
Yeah, it reached things. So, yeah.
Mhm.
How old was Rose when her first symptoms appeared?
So I would say Rose's symptoms appeared in the womb. She didn't move much. I remember her mom had we thought we miscarried at one point and we didn't. The labor was different.
Hmm.
Um, and so it was very, very different than with our first child, Weston.
Okay.
Um, and then the symptoms of uh, constipation
Hmm.
came fairly early on. And that's a big phenotype of this disease. Although you would never guess that constipation would you wouldn't see constipation in a child say, "Oh, we need to,
Yeah.
get a diagnosis," or certainly no doctor would diagnose for anything other than that. And then we began to see delays in developmental milestones, like crawling and walking, and the big sort of pivot was around 18 months where she lost her words. And
Mm.
we had already been going to see the doctor. We'd already been asking questions, and the general answer was, "Oh, every kid is different."
Yeah.
you know.
Uh, Go home, wait. Every kid's different. They develop at their own
Yeah.
pace. And so, how old was Rose when she was first diagnosed?
So I would say that Rose was about 3 when
Okay.
she was first diagnosed, I believe. We had been working on that uh, for quite a while.
Okay. So you noticed symptoms even before she was born, and it took 3 years to get a accurate diagnosis for her.
Yes.
And was it through genetic testing that she was diagnosed?
Ultimately, it was through a whole exome sequence that she was diagnosed. But the path, though, to get to that sequence, to get genetic testing was extremely arduous.
Oh,
And,
tell me about that.
so we went through MRIs. We went through these um, panel tests where they test for large diseases that have current therapeutics.
Mm-hmm.
We went through what I would call phenotypical assumptions. So the pediatric neurologist would say, "Well, she could have this disease," and then he'd test for that. She could have this disease, and he'd test for that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we could have had a diagnosis um, when Rose was born,
Yeah.
um, but no one told us that this was even possible.
Mm-hmm.
And it took our own research to even find out that we could do genetic sequencing to find it if she had uh, a disease.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, they give you no information when your child's born. When newborn screening comes back, you get no information of what was tested for and what wasn't, or that newborn screening only covers 1% of genetic disorders. And so they kind of just push you off with no information or misinformation into the diagnostic odyssey. And then you're set to paddle on your own through it. So,
Absolutely. And, parents, when we know that we're having a child,
mhm.
we read, we sign up for
Oh
classes.
yeah.
The pediatrician gives us, we get on all of the supplements that
Mhm.
we know help with in any complications in pregnancy, right? There's some evidence that now that we do all this preparatory work to
Mhm.
have a child, but no one ever talks about genetic sequencing
No.
ever.
When Rose was diagnosed, what was the physician able to tell you about the disorder?
So I'd first like to, I'd first start that I Googled, figured out genetic sequencing. I
Oh,
contacted GeneDx and I signed up for that.
oh, so you didn't
And
even you brought it to your physician. Your physician
so
didn't present it to you.
no, so I didn't know what I was looking at,
Oh,
right? Um, and sent it to our pediatric neurologist.
mhm.
And so then he read through it and, his the meeting was very short. And it was simply, your daughter has a rare genetic disease. There's no cure. There's nothing we can do. Good luck.
Mm, yeah.
And that was the end of it. But what the GeneDx report had were
Mhm.
2 researchers
Oh,
that had been working on the disease, and so he suggested that we contact them.
mhm.
And if it wasn't for that GeneDx report, we never would have, you know, we 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 had an entire community waiting for us,
Yeah.
researchers and other families that, um, even though there was no therapeutic, we could all band together and learn more about what our
Yeah.
kiddos are going to face and prepare for that.
Mhm. Do you know how many people in the world have been diagnosed with it?
Yes. So at the time, there was only about 40,
Mhm.
and now there's over 100.
Yeah.
And the Broad Institute did genetic sequencing
Mhm.
sort of survey where they sequence what 100,000 people, I think, or something like that.
Yeah.
And so based on those numbers, there's about 10,000 um, people with this disease, 1.5 in 100,000.
Uh-huh.
And but without things like without newborn screening, um, no one's ever going to really make a drug because you need at least 1,000 patients for most pharma biotech to even really be interested.
Mhm.
It's sort of like
Yeah, it's the tipping point so that they can,
it's the
because
tipping point.
drug development is so expensive that they need to make money off of it. I mean,
Hmm.
they're a business. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it needs to be sustainable. So what baffled me was that it wasn't that we didn't have enough patients, is that we didn't have the infrastructure of genetic sequencing to show that we had enough patients.
Mhm.
And that one thing alone, if we had had that before my daughter was born, we would more than likely would have already had a therapeutic out for her,
Yeah.
to to give her options. So it's really just this newborn diagnostic that, because it's not in place, has put a complete stop
Yeah.
to helping kids like my daughter.
Well, it's a huge burden because you, as a caregiver, have to take care of your child with a rare disorder. You have to find other patients with it. You have to build a therapy for it, which you're well on your way to. Do you want to tell me more about your foundation to cure a rose?
Yeah, so after the diagnosis and that sort of good luck scenario, I called Wendy Chung, who was one
Mhm.
of the who I guess used to head up GeneDx back in the day, and talked to her and Dr. Jennifer Bain, and uh, they began to explain what they had done with the natural history study, and that they were trying to find more patients, and so they wanted to recruit Rose to be a part of it. I began to look at the foundation around that disease as well as other foundations, and saw, as I talked to them and then began to talk to scientists, I learned that yesterday the best we could do would be to get together and pay for research. We have technologies to treat many of these diseases, and so I felt compelled to start a foundation for children like Rose with neurodevelopmental diseases that fall
Mhm.
under that marketable threshold, and say, could we develop a drug for Rose's disease and in turn build a pipeline for the next parent or the next disease that
Mhm.
needs infrastructure to develop these drugs? And so we started to Cure Rose Foundation, I guess 2.5 years ago.
Has that been
And
it? That was it?
yeah,
Just
well,
2.5 years?
2021 is when we got our our approval. So I
Oh,
started raising money before that.
uh-huh.
Um, and this stuff is expensive.
Very.
As I'm preaching to the choir.
No, no, tell me
And
about it.
yeah, well, and so it's actually fairly inexpensive comparatively to create a proof of concept treatment for
Mhm.
diseases that are amenable to a therapeutic.
Yeah.
And that was sort of our first step, which we did for Rosie and for her disease. But the clinical trial piece is not really set up for these ultra rare diseases.
Mhm.
And you're looking in the tens of millions for your safety studies and clinical trials
Yeah.
um, for this. So that's where we're currently at now, um, and I think about how much easier this would have been. I think about how maybe I still would have I'd still have a music career. I may not have even started a foundation if
Yeah.
there if all the kiddos had had a chance to be diagnosed with her disease. Um, Although I'm so grateful to be in this space and to
Uh-huh.
work on a drug for Rose and to help these kids, I would probably be, I would probably still have my same career.
Yeah.
I'd still be an artist.
I call
you
it a
know?
blessing curse
Yeah,
because it
yeah,
opens your world up to so many different things that you never even knew about before. You get to meet much more interesting people than being trapped in a cubicle doing engineering. And so, yeah, there's a lot of blessings that come with it, I found.
absolutely.
But then the
Yeah,
curse of seeing your child have to deal with a, a life
to
limiting disorder.
suffer.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, it's a really hard part of it. Um, yeah, most of the burden is just put on parents and caregivers. And how has it changed your family dynamic? One, the diagnostic odyssey, having to go through all of that turmoil, and then just daily living. I know even from where you put things in cabinets, there's a huge mental load that comes with it too. Trying to keep people safe and your house in some kind of order.
Yeah, I mean, in complete transparency, we got a divorce.
Mhm,
It was, we did not have the capacity to maintain our marriage and go through this.
mhm,
And largely that's allowed us to sustain our own lives. Um, their their mother who remarried has kids for a week, and then she gets a week off.
mhm.
And with someone like Rose, you need to be able to recoup because she takes so much work.
Yeah.
So that was it completely changed the trajectory of our family. And on top of that, Rose screams a lot, and she uh, I think I can't find any other mental health issue related to this other than PTSD.
Uh-huh.
And so I am, I feel like I'm in a constant state of panic
Yeah.
when she's around because she communicates oftentimes by screaming.
Mhm.
And you don't know, normally when you hear a child scream like that, they are in immense amount of pain or in danger,
Uh-huh.
and so your parent sort of fight or flight is pretty much on all the time. And so that affects your sleep, so I don't sleep very well. Um, and and then the house, as an example, this morning I am afraid that, like, I have to pay for maids, not because I have money to pay for maids,
Uh-huh.
but because it's physically impossible for me to work and keep up with the house all on my own, um, without it. I can do it good for the first like 4 or 5 days, and then by Sunday, it's like where the laundry just sort of goes over. And so I told the maids, I said, 5 minutos por favor. And I
Mhm.
went in the house and I tried to pick up as much as I could so they don't quit.
Yeah.
Maids quit, babysitters quit. Everybody quits on
Yes.
you because of your child
Yeah.
and the difficulty that it brings. So even when you're trying to get help,
Mhm.
family, it is like pulling teeth to try to get family to help,
Yeah.
just so I can go and do something enjoyable for myself
Yeah.
or take my oldest daughter on a vacation. And so, it's I literally have to guilt trip people into it, and bring have food brought in, a babysitter support brought in, and family.
Yeah.
And usually, if I can do all three of those things, which is hundreds of dollars a day,
Yeah.
then I can have a moment to take my oldest daughter to do something or me go do something.
Yeah.
And that's, unless you're upper middle class or wealthy, that's impossible to afford. And,
It really is.
it's affected me financially, significantly.
Yeah. And then on top of it, as they age, you still have a young child in an adult body. And then there's no care after the age of 12 for after school or any programming. And so then it compounds. I am right
Yeah,
there
I
with you.
mean, I think about Rose when she gets her period. How are we going to handle
Wow.
that?
I got all
I
that
think
covered for
about,
you. So don't worry
okay,
when that happens.
great.
We've gone through everything.
Okay, perfect. And I think about how she hits me in the face now she just turned 8. As an 8-year-old, I can handle it. As
Mhm.
a 16-year-old,
Yeah,
as a 25-year-old,
yeah,
if she does that to a caregiver, we're having to hire somebody else.
yeah. It's
You know?
yeah, it just compounds over and over and over.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's no treatments for H2. But you've started a company, Everloom, so you've gone even beyond starting a foundation. Can you tell me more of what you've done with your company?
Yeah. So what I first saw was that once you finally do get a diagnosis, you need to look and see if you can make a treatment. And so knowing that we have technologies now that can treat many of these diseases and you can develop them,
Mhm.
uh, I had no experience in drug development. And so I put a team of scientists together and we engaged an academic institution.
You say it so
And
lightly. So I just started a company. I put a team of scientists together.
well, well, this was before the company. So
No.
once we engaged the academic institution, they weren't really set up to do drug development for a
Mhm.
family that didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah.
And and I thought, wow, we really need someone to provide these services for families and think about how to do this in a way that a family can navigate this without having to become drug developers.
Yeah.
And so the lead chief scientific officer of the foundation and I found an investor to start Everloom Bio,
Mhm.
which was uh, with the idea that could we make Rose's drug at Everloom Bio, and could we offer the service to other families that wanted to do drug development and own all of their own intellectual property and data,
Yeah.
and
That's a
and
huge
so
part.
that's what we yeah, and that's what we started um, what, a year and a half ago, and we're working on eight different diseases now with 8 different families. So it's really, really exciting.
So going beyond Rose's disorder, you helped other disorders too, and all of this only because Rose was properly diagnosed. And so, what made you think you could do this?
Well, part of me is overly idealistic. And so
Uh-huh.
most of, I was a musician that believed I could get a major label record deal and have hit songs.
Uh-huh.
And anyone that thinks that is near the edge of crazy, because the chances of success are so incredibly low
Hmm.
that, if you really want to do something you have control over, almost any other career is a better choice. And
Yeah.
so, but after 15 years of failing at that and then finally being successful at it,
Uh-huh.
it sort of prepared me for this, to say, look, if you have a thing that you think needs to happen, and you surround yourself with the people that have done stuff like this before,
Uh-huh.
and then the idea of being able to do it shouldn't be you just got to figure it out. You got to fail enough times to get to a place where it's working. And so it was more of an idea on my end, and the people that have helped carry it out are neuroscientists and drug developers and CFOs and people that have experience in all the pieces that need to make something like that successful.
Yeah.
So
So, yeah, but you're still headlining places. You just headlined at Nord. So, how is
yes, yeah, it was my first time at Nord, and it was great to meet everybody there, and I think about how many families were there wishing and hoping that something is going to change. The regulatory is going to change, that the government's going to change, that policy is going to change, that a company, we're begging companies to make drugs, that even when the company wants to make the drug,
Mhm.
they end up shelving it or oftentimes just deprioritizing it because there aren't enough patients.
Yeah.
And so, even at all of these conferences and seeing all this, it still all comes down and
It's power,
centers around
yeah, the power of the
new,
diagnosis.
yeah, newborn screening would change the entire healthcare system,
Yes.
and it's complicated, so it's hard to explain this to people, but it is the single most thing that if it changed, all of
Mhm.
these other dominoes
Oh,
would
yeah.
would fall and open up access.
And it's the one time that it's somewhat equitable. 99% of babies in America are screened. I know if we hadn't had resources, we couldn't have paid for the genetic testing to have our children screened. And so, unless you're in a very small class in America, you're not going to get additional screening after newborn screening. And so, we have so many undiagnosed patients because of that. I
Yeah,
often hear them, I still hear from physicians, there's no point in a diagnosis if there's not a therapy, which just makes me want to pull my hair out of my head. Um, it's it's the exact opposite.
it
For
is.
yeah,
Yeah, it's a huge misunderstanding of how the drug development, like business and process in healthcare works to say that,
yeah, it's incredibly hard. So, from us talking, I take that you are in favor of expanding newborn screening for disorders that don't have treatments yet.
Yeah, for me personally, in my experience in this field, is the only way we're going to get treatments faster to kids
Hmm.
for diseases that we don't have treatments for
Yeah.
is newborn screening. It is the single most powerful tool, genetic sequencing, to to create to show the demand that already exists,
Yeah.
and it's cheap now. It's it takes a second to get your patient to do it. When patients have to do it themselves and take it in their own hands, it can take months and months and months to get your kit sent to the home,
Hmm.
to finally do the swab, to pack it up correctly, and to send it back to the company, and the company send the data back, in an email. And so if we could do this in, our
Off the
hospitals.
original, they can do it off the original dry blood spots. I mean, no, nothing else needs to be taken from the baby.
See, and that's incredible.
Yeah.
That just feels to me like the only reason we're not doing it is a lack of understanding of how much we need it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the newborn screening was set up in the early 60s when the ethics about people with especially intellectual disability was, warehouse them. It was before civil rights, before ADA, before Individuals with Disability Education Act. So it's still sitting back. The value of these people, it's still back in the 1960s, 60 years ago. And so, yeah, I was even looking at the Orphan Drug Act, and they've developed, a few hundred therapies, and some of them are for the same disorder. We have 10,000 rare disorders. And in the last 40 years, we've developed a few hundred therapies for 10,000 disorders. It's because we're not diagnosed. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And that's what's so unique about this time, too, is that with these technologies that we have so much safety data and development data around, that we can move so much faster than we used to. It's not just a small molecule 30 million, 30 years later, that we can do these things in as quick, as soon as a year to get to a trial, as we've seen for some of these rare diseases. But that one thing, I think about, Mila, Julia's daughter.
Mhm.
If she had had genetic sequencing at birth, they developed a treatment for Mila in a year after they knew what she had,
Yeah.
but it was too late for her and she
Mhm.
died.
Yeah.
And I think about her life and what it would have been like if she had been diagnosed at birth and had a treatment made for her before she started exuding symptoms.
Yeah.
You know,
I always think
um,
about our kiddos. They're the canary in the coal mine. They're the ones paying for it. So
yeah,
future children can have treatments. going through the diagnostic odyssey, letting the delay happen. With these disorders, every minute is a neuron. And so you're just losing time as things progress. And so,
Absolutely.
what do you see for what's your dream for the future for children born with Rose's disorder?
My vision for the future for kiddos born with Rose's disorder is that um, they have genetic sequencing when they're born,
Yeah.
and that they're immediately connected with a therapeutic.
Mhm.
Hopefully, the one that we're developing will be ready for them when
Yeah.
they're born, and that other companies developed therapeutics because these kids were sequenced. And so I Rose is beautiful and she's trapped inside of her brain.
Hmm.
And if the next Rose would have been could be diagnosed early, that Rose has the potential of growing up completely free of this disease.
Yeah.
And we can't give those children that opportunity without doing it.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen unless we change this. And so that's my dream, is that the next Roses that are born, their families don't get a divorce, their children grow up to fall in love, and they're playing, and before that they're playing in the playground, and they're you
Yeah.
know they're 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 talking back to their parents because they can communicate,
They're
and
throwing parties when you're out of town because they have
yeah,
the executive function to be able to do that. So,
all the things we complain about a neurotypical kid, I would
yeah.
give everything for to have with
Yeah.
Rose.
Yeah. I want to go back to one of the things you talked about when you got your report back from GeneDx and you were connected to the researchers. Did did you find other patients that had the disorder? And how was it having a community that shared the disorder?
Yeah, so what I don't think a lot of people realize is that it's actually parents and parent-led foundations and parent-led companies that
Hmm.
are moving the science forward right now for these, rare diseases. And largely, most of the funding for treatments like Rose's come from the patients. And so just so that's one thing that's really important to understand, that we don't need a diagnosis alone is powerful without a treatment, because it begins this process of understanding and connection. And when I got to meet other families with children like Rose, it made me feel not alone.
Hmm.
And I got to understand the different things that Rose could potentially become or not become,
Yeah.
which allowed me to have a deeper awareness of what the road ahead might look like,
Uh-huh.
which is really, really important when you think about how to create an environment for a child with a neurological condition,
Hmm.
because you have zero training in it. And so that connection with parents is crucial to knowing, hey, these diapers work really good for these older kids, or
Yeah.
this type of spoon or bowl keeps them from being able to throw their food
Hmm.
across the room.
Yeah.
These little rubber things keep them from spilling and drooling all over themselves. And so there's hundreds and hundreds of things
Yeah.
that, as a parent, as a caretaker, that you have to sort of experiment with. And so by meeting with this community, that collective knowledge just on a day-to-day level is it's critical.
Yeah. Yeah. I find so much value in our community that even without a treatment, being properly diagnosed, you're right. It makes you not alone. Like you have someone to reach out to. And even beyond our community, just the rare disease groups, because the phenotypes overlap a lot in these disorders. And that just having a human connection of somebody else that's experiencing what you're experiencing. It's just huge.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like what we're saying is we shouldn't tell someone that they're African American or they're female
Hmm.
or they like these are fundamental personality and cultural uh, sort of phenotypes of your child. And
Yes.
without knowing what the basis of these things are, we don't know how to best care for them. We're guessing,
Yeah.
at best. And so I mean, you're absolutely right. The being connected is a huge
Yeah.
um, change.
Evie's best friend has Down syndrome, and his mother is actually going to come on Ending the Odyssey and talk about their diagnosis. And Down syndrome doesn't have a treatment, but she could not even fathom the thought of them sending her home with her son and not telling, your child has Down syndrome. And I'm like, there's no treatment. So what was the point in telling you? And like the
Right.
thought could not, like, she's like, I don't even know how to make that thought go through my head. And so
Right.
that's what it is for us, even though we don't always have outward characteristics that show the disorders at birth or later on, they send us off without a diagnosis and without a manual, nothing. Like we're second class citizens, it feels like sometimes. So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. Is there a typical life expectancy for people with H2?
Yeah. So we don't know enough about this disease to know how long these kiddos will live.
Okay.
There is a 30-something-year-old that we know of,
Hmm.
but very little is known. And, that's always in the back of my head. Are we going to run into a medical complication like seizures or a heart problem or a neurological issue that would have us losing Rose,
Hmm.
for good? And it's right now she's trapped. So what's worse, being trapped her whole life or dying and being free of this disease? I mean, I think you can get into a very philosophical conversation around that. And as parents, knowledge is power, and either one of them creates suffering.
Yeah.
Whether the I watch many of these parents around these diseases, some that are still undiagnosed. You look at a parent with a 30-year-old or a 25-year-old, and I would say more often than not, they've never had any genetic
Oh
sequencing, nor
no.
do they even believe that
Yeah.
that that's something that they could do. And in fact, it's so hard to convince them to do it because they've had to live with the diagnosis of special needs
Hmm.
or severe autism their
Yes.
entire child's life. And so we've created a culture of this is the best we can do, and you not knowing, we're going to give you a blanket diagnosis and you just learn to live with it.
Yeah.
And so we've created a culture of families that have no hope,
Yeah.
and that's what I think has really changed with our next generation of kiddos.
Yeah. It seems to be after the age of 5, at least in my experience, that physicians are like, this is what it is. You're diagnosed or undiagnosed. And if you're undiagnosed, accept developmental delay, not otherwise specified, or, an autism diagnosis and go go off to therapy and we'll see you again in a year. So, so
Yeah, you're a number. I mean, I could be a pediatric neurologist if that's all I had to do.
oh, pretty much. Yeah.
It's like
Let me do a
like
microarray. You have all your
I
genes. Thank you. I'll see you in a year. Here's your bill.
yeah, yeah. And so I think, it's we have the technology to do this. We have the healthcare system in place to implement it.
Uh-huh.
We have insurance companies to pay for this nominal fee, which they're paying an exorbitant amount of money by not doing it,
Oh, yes.
with
The
all the
cost
other
of
tests. So
undiagnosed is so high.
yeah, there is zero reason for us
Mhm.
to not be doing this.
And
Zero.
The American College of Medical Genetics now recommends it for any child with a developmental delay to receive genetic testing. So, yeah, it's
No, that's great.
when the physicians come around. Well, thank you, Casey. I really appreciate this. You're so knowledgeable and you've done so much. And I'm really proud of you. And you've done a great
Thanks,
job.
Alice.
And more than that,
Well,
I'm happy to be your friend and go on this crazy journey sometimes together. So thank you.
yeah, I'm so grateful for you.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah. I'm gonna stop the recording.